The first thing I noticed about her was that she didn't try to be noticed at all. We staged at the edge of the airfield an hour before light, 11 of us plus the attached scout, and the cold came up off the concrete the way it does at altitude, dry and thin, and going straight through the fleece. I had my men spread along the wall checking each other's kit, and I walked the line the way I always did, tugging straps, thumbing magazines, putting my hand flat on a plate carrier here and there to feel it seated right. That was my patrol. I knew every man on it down to how he laced his boots and how he handled the third hour of a bad night. I had built that trust 1 mile at a time, and I did not give it away to strangers. She was a stranger. She'd come in on the resupply bird the evening before with a long case and a smaller ruck than any of us carried, and a set of orders that said she was attached for the duration of the movement as a reconnaissance asset. That was the word on the paper. Asset. I'd read it twice in the tent and set it down and not thought about her again until she appeared at the wall in the dark, already kitted, already still, standing a little apart the way a person stands when they have learned that standing apart draws the least attention. I put her at maybe 30, hard to tell in the half-light, medium height, lean through the shoulders, hair pulled back and tucked under so it wouldn't catch. Her gear was worn in the way gear gets worn when it has been carried a long distance many times, not beat up, not neglected, just used, every buckle where her hand would go for it without looking. The long case leaned against the wall by her knee. She had one glove off and was running her bare thumb along a seam in the case, back and forth, slow, the way you touch a thing you trust. Her name tape said Vale. "You the scout," I said. It wasn't a question. I already knew the answer and I wanted her to know I already knew. "Sergeant Vale," she said, level voice. Not soft, not hard, just even like a road with no potholes in it. Corley. "Sergeant Corley, team leader." I looked at the long case and then back at her face, and I let a beat go by so she'd understand what the look meant. "You've done movements like this before." Some, I nodded slowly. "This is high, cold, and steep, and the woods on the far side of the pass are thick enough you can't see a man at 20 feet. We move fast and we move quiet and we don't stop for anybody. You keep up or you get left. That's not me being hard. That's the ground being hard." "Understood," she said. That was all. Understood. No pushback, no eager little speech about how ready she was. None of the over-talking a person does when they're trying to earn a place they haven't earned yet. She just said the word and picked up her case and slung it across her back and stood there waiting to be told where to be. I'll tell you now, because you've probably already guessed it, that stillness of hers, which I read that morning as a person who didn't understand what she was walking into, was the exact opposite. But I didn't know that yet. That morning I read her the way I'd have read anybody the brigade dropped on my patrol at the last minute with a case I couldn't see inside, as weight I'd have to carry. Behind me someone laughed. It was Pruitt. Pruitt was my senior gunner, a big loud man who was very good at his job and knew it, and who filled silence the way water fills a low spot, automatically, whether you wanted it there or not. He'd come up to the wall with his gun across his chest and he'd been listening, and now he looked Vale up and down with the open, grinning appraisal of a man who has decided in advance that a thing is funny. "They send you to take pictures," he said. "We got a war correspondent now. That's real nice. Make sure you get my good side, sweetheart." A couple of the younger ones grinned because Pruitt was grinning. That's how it works on a patrol. The mood runs downhill from the loudest man. I should have shut it down right there. I want to be honest with you about that, because this is the part I've turned over the most in the years since. I heard him call her sweetheart, and I heard the grins, and I felt the small, mean warmth of a group closing ranks against a newcomer, and I did not shut it down. I let it stand. Part of me, and I'm not proud of it, part of me agreed with Pruitt. Part of me thought, yes, exactly, that's what she is, weight and a checkbox, somebody's good idea in a warm office who'll slow us down in the cold. Vale didn't answer Pruitt. She didn't look at him long. She looked at him just long enough to file him. That's the only way I can describe it now. A quick flat glance that took his measure and set it aside, and then she looked back out at the dark toward the pass, and her thumb went on moving along the seam of that case, slow, back and forth, like she was somewhere else entirely and only her body was standing at our wall. I called the patrol up. We shouldered our loads, and in the last gray minutes before the light came, I made the decision that I have had to live with, and I made it easily, the way you make a decision you don't think matters. Vale, I said, your rear security, stay on DOS, keep your head down, don't lose the file, let the shooters shoot. Copy, she said. Let the shooters shoot. I can still hear myself say it. We crossed the open ground in the blue before dawn and made the tree line as the sun came up somewhere behind the ridge, throwing no warmth, just a slow, grudging light that turned the pines from black to a deep, wet green. The Cerro Pines, the maps called that stretch of forest, though the men just called it the woods. They ran up the flank of the pass in a thick, dark belt, close-grown, the floor of them soft with 100 years of needles, and littered with deadfall gray trunks lying every direction where the wind had brought them down, some of them chest-high, so that moving through was never a straight line but a constant small negotiation, over and under and around. It was, as I'd told her, no place for a man who didn't know his business. I put Das on point because Das could read woods, and I strung the patrol out behind him in a loose file with enough space between men that one burst couldn't take two of us, and I walked forth, where I could see most of my people and get to any of them fast. Pruitt and the gun were behind me, and behind everyone, tail end, was Vale, moving with Das's spare, the young private we called Das because there were two Rothmans and only one of him. For the first hour I mostly forgot she was there, which was the point of putting her at the back. I had a route to keep and a pace to hold and 100 small things to watch, and a rear security scout you've decided is a tourist is exactly the kind of thing your mind lets go of when it gets busy. Then I stopped forgetting. It started small. We came to a place where the deadfall lay thick across our path, a tangle of downed timber that would have taken a careless patrol 10 noisy minutes to cross, and I turned to signal the men to hold while Das found a lane through, and I saw that Vale, all the way at the back, had already stopped. Not stopped because we'd stopped. She'd stopped a half-second before, and she was looking not at the deadfall but past it, up and to the left, at a low saddle in the ground where a game trail came down out of the higher pines. She was reading the land the way I read my men, automatically, all the time, without being told to. And when we finally threaded the deadfall and moved on, I noticed she took a different line than the man in front of her, a line that kept a fallen trunk between her and that saddle the whole way across, so that if anything had been sitting in that saddle, it would never have had a clean look at her. Nobody had taught her that in a warm office. An hour later we halted for water in a hollow, and I watched her without letting her see me watch. She didn't drop her ruck and sprawl the way a tired person does. She went down on one knee at the edge of the hollow, facing out, and she stayed there. And while the rest of us drank, she was doing something with her hand, holding it up flat and turning it slowly. And it took me a moment to understand she was reading the wind, not guessing at it, reading it, feeling for the little changes in how it came down through the trees, where it swirled and where it ran clean. Her lips moved slightly. She was counting something to herself. Distances, I realized later. She was ranging the hollow. She was ranging every open lane she could see and filing the numbers away, doing it as naturally as another soldier scratches an itch, and she was doing it in a hollow where nothing was happening, on the mere chance that something might. I want to be clear about what I did with all of this, because it's the part that shames me. I saw every bit of it. I saw a professional doing professional work at a level that should have made me sit up, and I explained it away. I told myself she was nervous, fussy, overcareful because she wasn't a real shooter and knew it, that all that ranging and wind-reading was the anxious fiddling of somebody who'd been given a case she wasn't sure she could use. I took the strongest evidence of her skill and I turned it, in my own head, into evidence of her weakness. A man will do that. When he has already decided a thing, he will bend the whole world to keep from having to decide it again. Pruitt kept it up low all morning. Every halt some little remark. You getting good pictures, sweetheart. Tourist keeping up. She never rose to it. Not once. And her not rising to it only made Pruitt work harder, the way it always does with a man like that, because the one thing he could not stand was being unable to get a reaction. By mid-morning he'd taken to calling her the tourist to the whole patrol, like it was her name, and the younger men had picked it up, and Vale carried it the way she carried the ruck, without comment, one boot in front of the other. The only time she spoke to me the whole march was once, and it stuck with me, though I didn't understand it then. We had come up onto a bench of flatter ground with the woods thinning a little in the draw ahead of us, a long, steep-sided cut where the trail funneled down between two rising walls of timber before opening out again on the far side. I was looking at the draw and thinking about time because we were behind, and the fast way through was straight down the trail, and the slow way was to work the high ground on the flank. I was leaning toward fast. Vale came up alongside me. She hadn't been told to. She stood looking at the same draw I was looking at, and she said quietly so only I could hear, "I don't like that ground." "You don't like it," I said. "The trail's the only easy way through. Both sides are high and close. If I wanted to hurt a patrol in these woods, I'd do it there." She wasn't excited saying it. She said it the way you'd read a weather report. "Let me take the left shoulder up top before the rest of you go in. 20 minutes. I'll have eyes down the whole draw." 20 minutes. We were 40 minutes behind already. I looked at her, this attached scout, this tourist, offering to peel off alone and climb a shoulder and cost me 20 more minutes on a bad day on a bad hunch, and everything I decided about her that morning came up in me at once. "We don't have 20 minutes, I said, "and I'm not splitting my patrol to put my one rear security element up a hill by herself. You stay in the file. Das reads the woods. We go through fast and quiet like I said." I softened it half a degree because she hadn't earned rudeness even if she'd earned nothing else. "You've got good instincts, but this is my ground and my call." She looked at me for a moment. Not angry. If she'd been angry, I might have felt better about it later. She just looked at me with that even, road with no potholes steadiness, and I had the brief, uncomfortable sense of being measured and found to be exactly what she'd expected, no more and no less. "Copy, Sergeant," she said, and dropped back to the tail of the file. I've asked myself a lot of things about that morning. Whether I'd have listened to Das if Das had said it. Whether I'd have listened to Pruitt. I know the answer. I'd have listened. The difference wasn't the woods, and it wasn't the draw, and it wasn't 20 minutes. The difference was that I had decided, before the sun came up, who counted on my patrol and who didn't, and I had put her on the wrong side of that line, and now the ground was about to make me pay for it. I want to tell you why I was like that, because I don't think a man gets to just be ugly in a story and leave it there. 8 months before that morning, in country that looked nothing like those woods, I'd had an attached element put on my patrol, an interpreter and a liaison, good on paper, cleared and vetted. And it had gone wrong in a way I don't tell people about, and I'd carried 2 of my own men down off a rooftop because of a decision I'd made trusting a stranger I hadn't trained with. I'd promised myself, coming home from that I would never again let the brigade's paperwork tell me who to bleed on my patrol. Never again would somebody I hadn't bled beside get to make my men bleed. It was a scar, and I thought it was wisdom, and I wore it like armor. The trouble with armor is that it doesn't know the difference between a blow and a hand held out. We went into the draw. I put Das on point down the trail, tightened the file, and told them to keep it moving. The walls of the draw rose on either side, close and dark with timber, and the trail ran down the middle of it. And I remember the quiet, that particular quiet of deep woods where even your own footfalls seem swallowed, and a man's ears strain so hard for a sound that they start inventing them. We were 2/3 of the way down in the tightest part of the cut when the woods came apart. It came from the right shoulder first, the high right, exactly the kind of ground Vale had wanted to climb, except it was the other side and the enemy had gotten there first. One long ripping burst of machine gun fire, and then the whole slope lit up, muzzle flashes stitching the tree line in a line that told me even in that first half-second that this was not two men who'd stumbled on us. This was a set piece. This was an ambush laid days ago by people who'd looked at that draw the same way Vale had looked at it and reached the same conclusion, and had then done the thing I had refused to let her do. Das went down at the front. I saw him go and I couldn't tell yet if he was hit or diving and I couldn't get to him. The air over the trail filled with the flat, vicious crack of rounds going past close, that sound like canvas tearing an inch from your ear, and bark and needles and dirt jumped off everything, and a man behind me was shouting and another wasn't shouting, and the not shouting was worse. Contact right. Contact right. I had my rifle up, and I was firing into the flashes on the slope without any real hope of hitting anything, just trying to make them keep their heads down long enough for my men to get off the trail. And I was screaming at the file to move, get left, get into the low ground on the left where the shoulder gave us a little cover from the guns on the right. Pruitt got the gun up. I'll give him that. Pruitt was loud and Pruitt was good. And inside 3 seconds of the first burst, he had his machine gun barking back up that slope, and the weight of it steadied the men the way a big gun does. But there were more of them than us, and they were above us, and they had chosen the ground. And a patrol caught in the bottom of a draw with guns on the high shoulder is a patrol that dies there unless something changes fast. I got to the left side of the trail and dragged Rothman down behind a fallen trunk with me, and started trying to build some kind of fight out of the chaos. Who's hit? Who's up? Where's the gun? Where's Das? Das was moving, thank God, low crawling back off the point with a torn-up leg, dragging his rifle. 2 others were down and I couldn't get to them and couldn't tell how bad. The fire off that right slope was relentless, methodical, professional. They weren't spraying, they were working us, sweeping the low ground where they knew we'd go. And I understood with a cold clarity that we had walked into something built by people who were good at this, and that in about 90 more seconds of it there were going to be a lot fewer of us. And then from somewhere off to the left and above, from the woods on the other shoulder, the shoulder nobody was on, the shoulder Vale had asked to climb, a single shot cracked out. One, clean and flat and distinct, cutting through the ragged storm of the ambush like a struck bell through noise. Up on the right slope, one of the muzzle flashes stopped. I didn't understand it. I don't think anyone did in that first moment. Pruitt was hammering away and men were shouting and I was trying to keep 6 things in my head at once, and one enemy gun going quiet in all that could have been anything, a jam, a reload, a man moving position. I filed it and kept fighting. Then it happened again. One shot, flat, unhurried from the left high woods, and a second flash on the right slope stopped. A gun that had been raking our low ground just stopped mid-burst and did not start again. Rothman had his face pressed into the dirt beside me, and he lifted it half an inch, and said the thing that I would hear in my sleep for a long time after, said it in a kind of stunned whisper with the whole draw roaring around us. "Who's shooting? Sergeant, who the hell is that?" I didn't have an answer for him. I keyed my radio and shouted for a status, expecting nothing, and instead I got a voice. It came over the net calm. That's what I noticed first, before I even placed it, that in a draw full of men screaming into their radios, one voice came through level and unhurried, spacing its words so they'd be understood the first time. "Corley Vale, I'm on the left shoulder high in the timber. I have eyes on their line. Keep your people down in the low ground and stop firing up the right slope. You're not hitting anything and you're marking your positions. Let me work." I lay there behind that trunk with the radio against my jaw, and I did not answer for a second, because my whole picture of the morning was turning over. Vale was on the left shoulder, high in the timber. She had peeled off the tail of the file in the first 3 seconds of the ambush, while I was screaming contact right and trying to build a fight, and instead of diving into the low ground with the rest of us, she had gone up, alone, into the exact ground she'd asked me for 20 minutes earlier and been refused. She had gone and taken it herself without a word, because she'd already known she'd need it. Vale Corley, I said, how many? Counted 11 guns on the right slope when it opened, 2 down, 9 left. They're in a line along the shoulder, staggered, good positions, pre-ranged onto your trail. This was set up days ago. A pause, half a breath. Then, still level, keep them looking at you. I'm behind their line. I'm behind their line. I understood then what I'd been hearing. Those clean, flat, single shots weren't coming at the enemy from the front, from where we were pinned. They were coming from above and behind the enemy's own line, from the one piece of high ground nobody had thought to hold, because holding it meant one person climbing alone into thick timber in the first seconds of an ambush, moving fast and quiet through deadfall she'd never seen, and setting up a hide before the people she was hunting even knew she existed. She had flanked an 11-gun ambush, by herself, in under 2 minutes, and now she was taking it apart one shot at a time from a direction they couldn't cover, because every gun on that slope was faced downhill at us, and she was up the slope behind them. Pruitt, I called. Shift fire, short bursts, low, keep their heads down, quit chewing up the sky. Everybody else cover and hold. Do not fire up the left shoulder. Say again, nothing goes up the left. That's ours. Pruitt looked back at me across 10 feet of torn dirt, his face a question, and I saw him hear it, that's ours, and I saw him not understand it and obey it anyway, because in the middle of a firefight even Pruitt knew that a voice that's certain was a voice to follow. He shortened his bursts. The men quit throwing rounds at the sky. And in the space we made by going quiet, you could hear her working. Strange thing to describe. In all that noise there began to be a rhythm underneath it, and the rhythm was hers. One shot. A gap, not a panicked gap, not a scared man's gap, but a measured one, the gap of a person breathing, settling, finding the next thing, taking it. One shot. On the right slope another gun went out, a gap. One shot. Another. The volume of fire coming down onto our low ground, which 2 minutes before had been a solid wall of it, began to thin. You could feel it thin. Where there had been 9 guns hammering us, there were 7, then 6, and the men around me who had been pressed flat into the dirt waiting to die started to lift their heads, because the storm was breaking and none of us were doing it. She was doing it. I got my head up over the trunk and looked up and to the left, into the timber on our shoulder, trying to find her, and I couldn't. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I knew roughly where she had to be from the sound, and I looked right at that patch of woods and I could not see her. No movement. No flash I could fix. She'd found an angle and a bit of shadow that ate the muzzle's signature. She had put herself into that hillside like she'd grown there. All those numbers she'd been counting to herself in the hollow, all that ranging of lanes where nothing was happening, she hadn't been fussing. She'd been rehearsing. She'd been building the map she was now shooting off of, and she'd built it hours ago, on a hunch I'd waved away, because that was simply how she moved through the world, as though the fight had already started and she was only waiting for everyone else to notice. On the right slope, the enemy figured it out. You could see the moment it happened. The fire that had been aimed down at us started to break up, to swing, men shifting in their positions to face uphill and behind, because they'd finally understood that the thing killing them wasn't in the low ground where they'd trapped us. It was above and behind their own line in the trees, and it was picking them off in the order that a professional picks targets. The leaders first, then the guns, then whoever showed themselves trying to find the shooter. And the instant they turned to face her, they gave us their flank. "They're turning," I shouted. "They're off you, hit them now, hit them now." And now it was the enemy caught between 2 fires, and now it was our turn to work, and Pruitt's gun opened up in earnest with a target instead of a tree line. And my men, who'd been 90 seconds from being overrun, rose up out of that low ground and put fire onto a line that had suddenly stopped being an ambush and started being a trap with them inside it. Vale had turned the whole thing over. She'd taken an 11-gun set-piece ambush that had us dead to rights, and in the space of maybe 4 minutes, flipped it into a killing ground with the enemy in the middle of it. And she'd done it alone, from a piece of ground I'd forbidden her to take. Her voice came over the net again, still level, still spacing the words. Corley, 3 of them are breaking left down the back of the slope, trying to get out the low end of the draw and flank you from the mouth. I can't hold them and cover your wounded both. Your call. Which do you want? Your call. Even then, even with her running the whole fight from that hillside, she handed the decision back to me, because it was my patrol and she knew it, and she would not take that from me even while she was saving it. I looked at my wounded Das dragging his leg, 2 men down I still hadn't reached, and I looked down the draw toward the mouth where 3 enemy were about to come around and catch us from behind. And for the first time all morning, I answered her the way I should have answered her at the wall. Cover my wounded, I said. I've got the mouth. Vale, I've got it. You keep my hurt men alive. Copy, she said. Go. I took Rothman and 2 others, and we went for the mouth of the draw at a hard, low run. And it was ugly and close, and I'm not going to dress it up. There were 3 of them, and there were 4 of us, and it was decided in about 40 feet of bad ground and a lot of noise. And when it was over, 2 of them were down, and one had thrown his weapon into the brush and put his hands up, and none of mine were hit worse than they'd started. We'd held the mouth. We'd turned the last card they had to play. And the whole time, behind me and above me, that flat, unhurried shot kept coming at its own pace, one and a gap in one, and I knew without looking that as long as I heard it my wounded were covered, because she'd said she'd cover them and she was covering them, and I had learned in the space of 10 minutes to trust that voice more than I trusted almost anything. Then the enemy fire stopped. Not thinned, stopped. The slope went quiet. The ones who could run were running, back over the top of the right shoulder and gone, dragging what they could, and the ambush that had been going to kill us all was a scatter of men fleeing a piece of ground they'd chosen and lost. The quiet after was enormous. It always is. Your ears ring in it and your hands start to shake now that they're allowed to, and you go around your patrol counting, touching, making sure. And I went around mine and did the count and could not believe the number I got. We had 4 wounded, Das's leg, 2 others hit and being worked on by the men around them, and 1 more grazed and cursing. 4 wounded and not one of them dead. Not one. An 11-gun ambush, set days in advance, pre-ranged onto our trail, sprung on us in the tightest part of a draw with every advantage of ground and surprise, and I was going to walk every single one of my men out of it. That does not happen. I want to be plain about that, because if you have never been in the bottom of a draw when the high ground opens up on you, you might not understand what I'm telling you. Patrols do not survive that. Patrols get chewed to pieces in that. The math of it is simple and merciless, and it does not care how good your men are. The only thing that changes the math is if someone does something that isn't in the math. If someone gets to the one piece of ground nobody thought to hold, and is good enough, and cold enough, and fast enough, to make 11 guns worth of advantage disappear one clean shot at a time. I got Das patched and stable, and I got my wounded consolidated and security back out, and I did all the things a team leader does. And the whole time part of me was looking up at that left shoulder, at the dark timber where I still couldn't see her, waiting for her to come down. She came down slow. Not because she was hurt, I didn't know yet that she was hurt, but because she came down the way she did everything, deliberately, checking her ground, the long rifle held easy in both hands, her eyes still moving over the slope she just cleared like she didn't quite believe it was done, and wasn't going to be caught believing it if it wasn't. She came out of the tree line into the gray light at the edge of the draw, and my men saw her come, and one by one they went quiet, and it was a different quiet than the one after the guns. Because they were doing the same math I'd done. They'd been face down in that low ground listening to those flat single shots break the ambush apart, and they'd heard that level voice on the net turning the whole fight over, and now here came the person who'd done it, walking out of the woods with a long rifle and a rucksack smaller than any of theirs, and it was the tourist. It was the war correspondent. It was Sweetheart. It was the checkbox I'd stuck on rear security, and told to keep her head down and let the shooters shoot. Pruitt was staring at her like he'd never seen her before, in a way he hadn't. She walked up to me and stopped, and only then, close, did I see it, the dark wet patch spreading along her left side, low below the ribs, where at some point in those 10 minutes on that hillside a round had found her, and she had not said one word about it over the net, had not so much as changed the pace of her voice, had gone on covering my wounded with a hole in her side, because I had told her that's what I needed, and she had decided that's what she'd do. "You're hit," I said. My voice didn't come out right. She looked down at her side like she was mildly interested in it. "It went through," she said. "Missed anything that matters. I'll want it looked at before we move." And then, because she must have seen something breaking up in my face, she added, level as ever, "Your patrol's intact, Sergeant. That's the report. Your patrol's intact." Like it was nothing. Like she hadn't just done the impossible thing on the impossible ground and taken a round doing it and never mentioned the round, because mentioning it might have made me pull her off my wounded. I got her sat down against a trunk and got a medic on her, and I knelt there while it was worked on, and I could not find anything to say that was big enough. Everything I reached for was too small. Thank you was too small. I'm sorry was both too small and too large, and I hadn't earned the relief of saying it. So I said the only true thing I had. "You asked me for that shoulder," I said. 20 minutes ago, you asked and I said no." "I know," she said. "You went and took it anyway, in the first 3 seconds, without orders." She looked at me and there was nothing unkind in it, nothing that rubbed my nose in anything, just that steady, even regard. "You'd have got there yourself in another 30 seconds, she said. "You were already moving your people left. I just had a head start on where they'd need me." A pause. "You run a good patrol, Sergeant. It's why you've still got one." She was giving it back to me. That's what I finally understood. She had every right in the world to look at me and let me feel exactly what I was, and instead she was handing me a way to stand up straight in front of my own men. "You run a good patrol. It's why you've still got one," and she meant it, or meant it enough. And it was the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me, and she did it with a bullet hole in her side. I didn't take it, not the easy way. I'd have hated myself. "No," I said, quiet, just between us. "I sidelined you. I called you wait. My gunner called you sweetheart, and I let it stand because part of me agreed with him. And you climbed a hill I forbade you to climb, and you saved every man I've got, including him, including me." I looked at her straight. "I read you wrong from the wall. That's on me, and I'll carry it, and I wanted you to hear me say it before anybody comes to tell me who you are, because I think somebody's about to." Something moved behind her eyes at that. The first thing all day that wasn't perfectly level. Because somebody was. The relief element reached us maybe 40 minutes later. A larger patrol that had heard the fight go long and come up hard from the far side of the pass, led by a lieutenant colonel I knew a little and respected a lot. A gray, spare man named Hargreave, who'd been doing this longer than most of us had been alive, and who did not spend words he didn't have to. He came down into the draw and took in the scene the way men like him do. One slow sweep, the swept slope, the enemy dead, my 4 wounded stable, my whole patrol alive in a place that by every rule should have buried half of us. I saw him do the math too. I saw him not believe it. He came to me, and I gave him the report, fast and clean. And I got to the part about the left shoulder and the single shots, and the voice on the net turning the ambush over. And I told him the scout attached to my patrol had flanked an 11-gun set piece alone in the opening seconds, and taken it apart from behind. "Your scout," Hargreave said, "attached asset, long case, small ruck, came in on last night's resupply." "Yes, sir." "Name?" "Vale, sir." Hargreave went still. It was a small thing, a stillness in an already still man, but I was standing close and I saw it land. He turned and looked across the draw to where she sat against the trunk, patched now, the long rifle across her knees, and he looked at her for a long moment with an expression I couldn't read. And then he said, not to me, quietly, almost to himself, "What's her call sign, Sergeant? Did she give you her call sign? No, sir, never came up. There wasn't time. Hargreave walked across the draw. My men watched him go. He was a lieutenant colonel and she was a sergeant sitting in the dirt, and by every custom of the thing she should have been the one getting up, but Hargreave crossed the distance himself, and he stopped in front of her, and he looked down at this woman my gunner had called sweetheart, and he said one word. He said, Shadow 9. It wasn't a question. It was the way you say a name you'd been told you might never see attached to a face, carefully, like it might not be true, like you wanted it to be true. And Vale looked up at him, and for the first time since the airfield wall, something in her settled all the way, not surprise, but the particular quiet of a person who has been carrying a thing alone for a long time and has just been seen carrying it. She didn't stand. She didn't have to. She just held his eyes and said, level, even, a road with no potholes. It's been a while, sir. Nobody's called me that in a long time. I didn't know the whole of it. I've never known the whole of it, and I've stopped trying to. Some records stay sealed for good reasons, and the men who earn them don't put them on the table. But I know what Hargreave told me later, quiet, off to the side, in the way one professional tells another something he's decided he's earned the right to hear. He told me that call sign belonged to a long-range reconnaissance sniper whose Overwatch record had been sealed years back, that there'd been a stretch of country, and a stretch of fighting where Shadow 9 was the reason a great many men who should have died came home instead, that she'd held ground alone that shouldn't have been holdable and covered extraction single-handed that shouldn't have been survivable, and that when it was over they'd sealed the file and she'd gone quiet, taken the plain billets, the scout attachments, the rear security lines on other men's patrols, and let the world go on thinking she was wait. He told me there were commanders who'd have given a great deal to have Shadow 9 on their ground and hadn't known. She was walking around the whole time under a name tape that just said Vale, going where she was sent, being called sweetheart by gunners who didn't know any better, and doing the work anyway quietly, because the work had never once been about being known for it. You had her on rear security, Hargreave said to me, not cruel, just a fact laid down for me to look at. I did, sir, I said. I won't again. He nodded slowly. Then he did the thing I'll remember longest. Lieutenant Colonel Hargreave, gray and spare and 30 years into this, turned to face her fully, and he came to attention, and he brought his hand up in a salute, slow, deliberate, complete, and he held it, to a sergeant sitting in the dirt with a hole in her side. And she got her feet under her, because a salute like that you rise for, and she stood, one hand pressed to her side, and she returned it, and the two of them held it there in the gray light at the bottom of that draw while the whole patrol watched. And then my men, one by one, came to attention too. I don't know who started it. It didn't matter. Das got up on his one good leg with his arm over Rothman's shoulder and stood as straight as a torn-up leg would let him. The two other wounded who could stand stood. And Pruitt, who'd called her sweetheart at the wall, who'd made the tourist her name for a whole cold morning of marching, Pruitt set down his gun and stood up and put his hand up in a salute and held it, and his loud face had nothing loud left in it. And I watched a round of grief and shame and something like awe go across it all at once, the whole reckoning of a man who has just understood exactly who he spent the morning mocking, and exactly who spent the morning keeping him alive. I came to attention with them. I brought my hand up, and I want to tell you that when I saluted her it was not the salute you give a rank. It was the other kind, the rare kind, the kind you give maybe once or twice in a whole career if you're lucky. The salute you give a person who walked into the worst ground on the worst morning and did the thing that wasn't in the math and never once needed you to see her do it. She stood there and took it, all of it, the colonel and the patrol and the doubter last, and she didn't gloat and she didn't soften into tears and she didn't say a word about being right about the draw when she'd had every right to. She just held herself straight with her hand on her side and let the men who doubted her make it right the only way men can. And when it was done she gave a small nod, like a door closing gently on something, and that was all. Later, when the wounded were moving and the relief had the slope, and we were finally getting ready to walk out of those woods, Pruitt went over to her. I watched him do it. It took him something to do it. You could see the cost of it in how he walked. He stood in front of her and he couldn't get the first words out for a second, and then he did. "I called you," he started and stopped. "The things I said at the wall all morning." He shook his big head. "I don't have any excuse for it." Vale looked at him for a moment. "And then she said the thing that told me, more than the shooting had, more than the call sign had, what kind of person had been walking at the tail of my file all morning. 'You kept your gun in the fight when it counted,' she said. 'You shortened your bursts the second Corley called for it, and you gave me the quiet I needed to work. I heard it. That's the man I'll remember. A beat. Not the other one. Let that one go.'" Pruitt's jaw worked. He nodded. He couldn't speak. He picked his gun back up and went to his security position, and he was a different man carrying it, and as far as I know he stayed different. We walked out of the Cerro Pines in the early afternoon with all our men alive and a scout in the middle of the file now. Not the tail. I put her in the middle, in the protected place, over her mild objection, and for once she let me have the call. The light came down clean through the pines, and the woods were quiet the way woods are quiet when they've given up all the violence they had in them, and I walked my patrol home. I've told this once. I'm telling it now because I think it ought to be told, and because there's a thing in it I'd want a younger sergeant to have, if I could hand it to him at the airfield wall before he makes the call I made. It's this: the people who will save you do not always announce themselves. Sometimes the one the whole patrol has decided to laugh at is the one standing between all of you and the ground where you'd otherwise die, and she will not tell you so, and she will not need you to believe it, and she will go up the hill you forbade her and do the work anyway and take the round without a word and hand you back your own dignity when it's over. You don't get to choose whether people like that show up in your life. You only get to choose whether you're the man who saw it and said so, or the man who called her sweetheart at the wall and had to learn the truth at the bottom of a draw. I know which one I was that morning. I have spent every morning since trying to be the other one. Her name tape said Vale. Her call sign was Shadow 9. And there are 11 men who walked out of the Cerro Pines that afternoon who will tell you, to this day, that the finest soldier any of them ever served beside was the one they'd been told to keep at the back, and who came out of the forest when the whispering started, and made the whole world stand up straight.